Lots of people make mistakes when adding and subtracting negatives. They may vaguely remember a rule such as 2 minuses make a plus, but this would lead them to making mistakes such as -2 take away 5 is equal to +7. This is Mr. Butler Maths, and in this video I'm going to show you a tool to prevent you making mistakes when adding and subtracting negatives. It's a tool we've all seen before, a number line. Before we get to complicated calculations such as -1 subtract -4, let's start by seeing how basic calculations look when laid out on a number line. My first example is 2 plus 3. The first number is my starting point on the number line. I'm going to start at 2, and when I add 3, I'm moving 3 spaces to the right, which takes me to +5. So 2 plus 3 is equal to 5, as I'm sure we all knew. Let's look at another basic calculation, 10 take away 7. With 10 take away 7, remember I start with my first number, so I'm starting at 10, and then I'm going 7 spaces to the left, which takes me to 3. So 10 take away 7 is 3. Again, very straightforward. Our next calculation is still quite basic. 3 take away 3. I always start at the first number, so I start at 3, then I'm going 3 to the left, which takes me back to 0. Therefore, 3 take away 3 is 0. This next calculation is the first one that might trip up a few people. 1 take away 3. When you use a number line, this becomes quite obvious. However, lots of people, when they glance at this, think the answer will be +2. They mentally transform the calculation into 3 take away 1 because they're used to having positive answers. But when we do 1 take away 3, we remember that the first number is our starting point, so we start at 1, and then we move 3 to the left. When we move 3 to the left, we move past 0 to -2. Therefore, 1 take away 3 is -2. Notice the positive numbers are in red, 0 is in black, and the negative numbers are in blue. I've used a different colour blue for the negative numbers and the subtract symbol. That's because I think it's helpful to think about negative as a position on the number line and subtract as an operation. In the same way, you can have positive numbers on the number line and adding as an operation. Adding is something that you do, and positive is a property of a number. Let's now look at -2 plus 5. Again, this type of calculation can trip a few people up, but when we put it on a number line, I think it becomes quite obvious. We always start at our first number, which is -2. Then we add 5, so that means we're going 5 spaces to the right, which is going to take us past 0 to +3. So -2 plus 5 is +3. Okay, now we've covered adding and subtracting from different starting points. I'm going to make things a little more complicated by looking at adding negatives and subtracting negatives. But to do this, it's helpful to go back to what a very easy calculation looks like on the number line. That calculation is 7 plus 4. You could think about this as +7 plus +4. We don't need to write the positive in there, but I've shaded them in red to remind us that those numbers are positive. So as always, we start on the number line with our first number, so we start at 7, and then we go 4 spaces to the right, taking us to +11. 7 plus 4 is 11. Very straightforward, but also helpful for this next trickier one. Now let's look at 7 plus -4. Notice that the 7 is in red, the adding is in a different colour red because that's an operation, and then we have -4 in blue. So we start at 7 because the first number is 7. When we add -4, we must go 4 steps in the opposite direction to when we added +4. So instead of going to the right this time, we're going to the left, and that takes us to 3. 7 plus -4 is equal to +3. There's actually a shortcut for thinking about this. When you're adding a negative, that's the same as just subtracting a positive number. So I could have written this as 7 take away 4, which again is equal to 3. So when we add a negative, that is the same as subtracting. Let's apply that to a trickier one now. This time, we're doing -2 add -3. As always, I start at the first number, so I start at -2, and then as we saw in the previous example, when I add a negative number, that's the same as subtracting, so I'm going to the left, and I'm going to go 3 spaces to the left, which will take me to -5. So -2 add -3 is equal to -5. Again, adding a negative is the same as subtracting, so we could have written this as -2 take away 3, and which also has an answer of -5. So now we've seen subtracting and adding negatives. Now let's look at taking away negatives. When we looked at 7 add -4, we realised that was the same as subtracting. What about if we do 7 subtract negative 4? So our starting point is still going to be 7 because we always start with the first number. Then, if we remember back, when we added negative 4, that was the same as subtracting. We went to the left. If we're subtracting negative 4, we're going to go to the right by 4 spaces. So that takes me from 7 to 11. So 7 take away negative 4 is 11. Another way I could think about subtracting negatives, a shortcut, is that when I subtract a negative, that is the same as adding. And as we can see, 7 plus 4 is also 11. To apply this shortcut though, we have to remember that we're subtracting a negative. That is, the subtract and the negative symbols have to be next to each other. This wouldn't work if it was something like negative 3 add negative 5, because in that case, the two negative symbols are not next to each other. So now we know subtracting a negative is the same as adding. Let's look at one final example. This time, we're going to start with a negative and subtract a negative from that. We're going to do the calculation negative 1 take away negative 4. As always, we start with the first number, so we start at negative 1, and if we're subtracting a negative, we now know that that means we go to the right, because it's the same as adding. Subtract negative 4 means moving 4 spaces to the right from negative 1, which would take us past 0 to positive 3. Therefore, negative 1 take away negative 4 is positive 3. And remember, when we're subtracting a negative, that's the same as adding. And negative 1 add 4 is also 3. As a quick summary, when you have two plus signs next to each other, which we don't normally see, we'd normally just see one plus sign by itself, we would say we're adding a positive, and that's the same as a shortcut as just adding. When you're adding a negative, that's the same as just subtracting a positive number. So when we have a minus and then a plus, we would say subtracting a positive, which is the same as taking away. The final example of a minus next to a minus, we would say that is subtracting a negative, and that is the same as adding. So we move to the right on our number line. Whenever you're stuck with a calculation involving negatives, it's always helpful to just sketch out a very quick number line and remember that you start with the first number in your calculation, and then you just need to work out if you're moving to the left or to the right, and that will help you get your answer. That's it for this week's video. As always, leaving a like really helps me out, and if you want to find your way back for more mathematical content, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks guys, and happy half term.